going to go back in the Wayback Machine a little bit here. This is back in '87. I think this is when former Labor Secretary Ray Donovan, remember that? Well, it was a big case here, and he was cleared of fraud charges in the Bronx. It was all said and done. He decided to get to the steps of the courthouse, and he said, everybody listening? Well, he said, I got a question. Should this indictment have ever been brought? Which office do I go to get my reputation back? Who's going to reimburse my company for the economic jail it's been in for the last 2.5 years? It begged the question that even if you win, you sometimes lose because of the charges brought against you, and their reputation will all go. Now, I mention this because Attorney Sanford Rubenstein is walking away a free man. Now, again, let me do a major qualification here. I do not want to ever be labeled Sanford Rubenstein's chief defender, okay? But he was accused, as many of you know if you read the tabloids and anywhere else for that matter, of sexually assaulting a woman who worked closely with Al Sharpton at Rubenstein's Manhattan apartment. You may also remember the images of police hauling bags of evidence out of Rubenstein's apartment just coincidentally when the cameras were there. Rubenstein, he's been cleared of all charges. But the question again comes back to, where does he go to get the reputation back? Now, you've all defended folks who either the charges were never brought or that they were cleared or whatever else. But then comes the question of a Pyrrhic victory. If there isn't a counterclaim that can happen, if there isn't civil damages that can be brought later on, and it's not that they're getting off on a technicality, but there really wasn't enough of a case to bring in the first place. Again, maybe bad case makes bad law here, but that happens a lot more than the public thinks, right?
It does, and in some instances, in Mr. Donovan's situation, the damage is irreparable. And you know, prosecutors and agents, for the most part, it's just water off a duck's back in many instances. In this case, though, the ruling was that the evidence was not credible enough. It's not only that there wasn't enough, and I'm sure that he will use the media to cite that, and he'll be back. But in several instances, you know, I've witnessed it throughout my career, the pain and turmoil that a family and an accused goes through, that even when they're exonerated, they're just hurt, they're damaged, and you can't get it back. You can't get your reputation back, you can't get your livelihood back. It is tragic in many instances.
I mean, in this case, you say cleared of all charges. I mean, I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, I think the district attorney made a calculated decision after reviewing all of the evidence in the case that he didn't have sufficient evidence to establish that this was not consensual. And I applaud D.A. Vance for understanding that if he didn't feel confident that the evidence would support an indictment, that he chose not to indict. As far as the reputation, there's an interesting thing here. Rubenstein gets the benefit of it being a high-profile situation, because when the allegations were made, it was on the front page of the tabloids. The fact that he's been cleared or the fact there's no criminal charges being filed, that's on the front page. The clients that Jimmy may represent or I may represent, their damage is done because all of these indictments basically will make the newspapers. What you don't find in the newspapers, or maybe buried on the back pages, is the fact that a jury found an individual not guilty. So as a result, that person who falls into that second category, his reputation is tarnished, and there's nothing he can do to get it back. Rubenstein, he's going to get up there and say, hey, there was nothing to this in the first place.
Except there also is, and you guys are closer to this than me, I can't think anybody of sound mind is going to come to this guy. But also, to have, you know, all the embarrassing headlines that went attached to it. I can't even get into it. Even
Richard, these people went to him for one reason, not because he's a nice guy. They went to him because he was able to bring in money to them. He was able to get big settlements. So that's the driving force. I think that now that this storm has passed, I don't doubt for a minute that he's going to still get those kinds of cases because people go to him wanting to get the paycheck.
Sure hope you're wrong, Bill.
But is he still going to have the backing?
No, absolutely not.
Because let's face it, that's where a lot of the work came from.
But you also have to look, and we're talking about credibility. Now, the DA finds there's not credibility. And I tend to think that as your power, you know, elevates, the level of credibility of anyone who accuses you tends to diminish. So if Tawana Brawley was to testify against one of our clients, you're probably going to get an indictment. We're probably going to trial to defend that. I mean, I've tried cases where the person was no more credible than Tawana Brawley. It's just that the person, my client, wasn't an assistant district attorney or a police officer.
Well, if you could, you brought up that case here, and I covered both the original case against Pagonis and others, and then the anti-defamation case, the defamation case, I'm sorry, that he brought one, but still. His life was destroyed.
Absolutely.
His life was destroyed. People attached to their lives was destroyed. There was, even with the civil suit, I mean, they didn't see money for 15 years later. My point is only, even if you win, it's like a Pyrrhic victory because no one was ever going to hire him back as an attorney.
You're scarred.
But depending on who you are, you may not win. And depending on who you are, it's pretty rare that a DA comes back and says, "Oh, I don't think there's enough evidence." It's uncontroverted that they had a sexual relationship. Question is whether it was consensual. And normally, those cases go to the grand jury, and then you get to see how it's put in the grand jury there. Well, you probably don't, but then it ends up becoming a case where either you enter a plea of guilty to something or you're trying.
But I think you would agree. Look, you were a DA, and I think you would agree that you're the one who's got to make the decision as to whether to charge a crime. And if you investigate it and you yourself see issues with respect to the complainant's credibility, are you going to put that case into a grand jury, seek an indictment, and subject the accused?
Absolutely not.
to?
No,
Okay.
I'm not. But what I'm saying is this, though. DA Vance in the past has found that there's no evidence when you have videotape of police officers macing women at the Occupy Wall Street. So it's crystal clear that a crime occurred there, and he's found no reason to charge. And at the same time, you're charging people for simple possession of marijuana. So that's all I'm saying is that politics comes into play when you determine who's there. No one who's innocent, or if you have a question as to whether someone committed a crime, should be charged.
No, but Mayo's got a good point in another way, though. I have to say, if a DA looks at a case like this and says, I've got a complainant who was headstrong and who was telling me that it happened, but I don't think I can win. Don't they factor in? I don't want to lose
Absolutely.
this big a case.
How about the
Absolutely.
Strauss case?
I don't want to lose
don't forget
that
that
big a
one.
case.
So that makes you somehow less
I have to
credible, and you
think-
don't even get the
I mean,
presentation.
come on, how many people get
It may,
indicted
and
on
it
race?
could-
I got to hit a break, but Bill, really quick, just so the public gets, it's really hard to be able, after that kind of a case, to go back and win a countersuit, right? To say that you were defamed. I mean, the threshold that you were
Well,
wrongly
different.
prosecuted and that there was never enough
He
evidence to
wasn't
justify.
First of all,
he wasn't even prosecuted.
First
Yeah.
of all, look, Rubenstein is smart enough to know, being that he's a lawyer. So let's say he files a civil lawsuit for defamation. What's he going to collect? Number one, and number two. What happens is all of these allegations are aired in the courtroom,
Right.
and he's already avoided that because the DA has said, "I'm not going to indict you."
Take them less time to start making money again.
Okay, when we come back, interesting case. We talk about parents' rights here, but then there's what is in the best interest for the child. We're going to go to Connecticut, where a teenager being ordered to undergo chemotherapy treatments by the state, even though not only she doesn't want them, but her parents don't either. The question is the state overstepping its limits or doing what's in the best interest of the child?